Rodrigo García is the writer and director of numerous films and television episodes. He strikes many viewers and critics as an uncompromising artist, an innovator, a director loyal to his own vision, a filmmaker's filmmaker, an actor's filmmaker who attracts A-list talent, major stars who respect and admire his work. His two most recent films, 4 Good Days and Raymond and Ray, starred Mila Kunis and Glenn Close, Ewan McGregor, and Ethan Hawke. And actors come back again and again for the joy of working with him. He's made 4 films with Glenn Close, for instance. This past Friday, we screened one of his masterpieces. Perhaps some of you were there, 9 Lives at Page Hall downtown. It's an incredible film that throws off the yoke of conventional narrative expectations. It's composed of 9 vignettes about women trapped in the various predicaments of their lives, linked not by story, but by theme and mood, and featuring some of the best actors at work. Stephen Holden of the New York Times called it the closest movies have come to the cinematic equivalent of a collection of Chekhov short stories. It's very fitting to show that film as a pairing with Rodrigo's memoir of his extremely famous father and his less famous but equally fascinating mother. That memoir is A Farewell to Gabo and Mercedes, a son's memoir. It's for sale, and you can get a copy signed and get a chance to meet the author here after the event. It was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, by the way. A memoir of their old age, their mental and physical decline, and their passing from life into memory. The book, like the film, 9 Lives, is composed of short vignettes, meditations on the meaning of their lives, indeed, on the meaning of life. Each vignette is very short, very sad, and very beautiful. There are also family photographs. It's a privilege to be welcomed as a reader into these very private moments of a man, Gabriel García Márquez, a writer who meant so much to so many of us, and to the life of his better half, Rodrigo's mother, Mercedes Barcha, a character unknown to most of us, but as rich and interesting as Gabo, that colossus, that literary giant, that transformer of world literature. And it's such a pleasure to see them through fresh eyes as flesh and blood human beings with their quirks and their frailties. For anyone who has lost a parent or parents, this book will resonate profoundly. For lovers of literature, hungry for new perspectives on the books they love, this is a book to receive with gratitude. Please welcome Rodrigo García. I have to apologize. I meant to choreograph this differently and to kind of welcome you to the stage, so to make you stand there. I hope that wasn't excruciating.
It was excruciating.
So thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I promised at the afternoon session that I would ask all new questions, and so I'm going to ask some questions, then I'll turn it over to all of you. Before we begin, I just wanted to repeat that phrase from William Kennedy's review of 100 Years of Solitude in the National Observer in 1970 or thereabouts, more than 50 years ago. Quote, "The first piece of literature since the book of Genesis that should be required reading for the entire human race." Is that an overstatement in your view, or is
no, I mean, my life has been basically recuperating from that line, but I mean, my father would say that he was delighted that Bill thought so, of course.
So, as a friend of Fidel Castro and a communist sympathizer, your father was barred from entering this country for many years.
Yeah, he came for the first time. He was actually a correspondent of the newly formed Prensa Latina, which was a news agency that the Cuban Revolution started, and he was sent to the U.S., where he ran into the equal pressure of the U.S. government not trusting him and the Cubans firing him because he wasn't communist enough. So, you know, things haven't changed that much in that area, the sandwich. So after that, yes, he lost his visa. And I think the first visa he got was 10 years later. He got a visa to come to Columbia University to receive an honorary doctorate. And after that, for years, he would have a one-time entry visa, you know, until he said, at one point he said, that's it, I'm not going unless I get a regular visa. And it wasn't until the Clinton years that that was possible.
Yeah, I actually remember the Writers Institute making several inquiries, and I was in the part of the Writers Institute in the 90s, and I remember that we reached out to the State Department a couple of times. I mean, we've always wanted to bring him here, and we've honored your father indirectly at many events. Notably, we brought translator Gregory Rabassa of 100 Years of Solitude, Edith Grossman, who also translated work of your father. Much more recently, Jose Rivera, screenwriter of the forthcoming Netflix series adaptation of 100 Years of Solitude. And we wish that we could have honored him here directly on the Albany stage.
You know, he was on a list, I can't remember what the list was called, but it was one of these very blunt instrument Cold War lists where it was, you know, like him and Dario Fo and a couple other screenwriters and, you know, maybe Samuel Beckett, and then every terrorist in the world, you know, it was just like there's that list. Yeah. So
forgive me if this embarrasses anyone, but at dinner tonight with Rodrigo, we had a colleague of ours and a friend of the Writers Institute, Victorio Reza Sili, who named his son after your father. His son's name is Marquez, and Rodrigo had, and Marquez is here. Is yes? Oh, he's right there. Big hand for Marquez. You know, Rodrigo had the treat of meeting him. Do you ever, and forgive me if this is a terrible question, tell me so, but do people ever treat you as a kind of holy relic of your father's?
You know, you know, people say to me, it's an honor to meet you. Your father was my favorite author. So, you know, you have to make a bridge there. You know, your father was my favorite author, and you'll do for now. But listen, it's so full of admiration and affection. You know, what you know, it's all good. It's all good stuff. Yeah.
So Gabo, your father, is very much the subject of the title essay of Bill's nonfiction collection, Riding the Yellow Trolley Car, Selected Nonfiction, about a yellow trolley car, or about a yellow trolley car that Bill may or may not have hallucinated. Forgive me, Bill, if that's not the case. Bill Kennedy's here. You can applaud for Bill Kennedy as well. Hallucinated in Barcelona during a visit to Spain to interview your father, and I'm not going to synopsize that essay. You'll need to read it or reread it. But I wanted to mention that we have a literary magazine at the Institute that we call Trolley. So your father's part of the Institute in that way as well. maybe we should actually, since it was at dinner, and none of you will be bored by this, maybe we should talk about that visit. Bill recalled that you and your brother were listening to American Pie.
Yeah, we lived in Barcelona, and Bill had, famously written that review, and he came to Barcelona to meet with my dad and I think write a profile of him. And it must have been 73, perhaps, 74. And my brother and I at that time were totally addicted to Don McLean's American Pie, that record. And Bill said that he had friends in common with Don McLean, which, for us it was like, oh my God. But yeah, I remember, the night very well. In fact, I told my brother that I was coming to see you, and he remembered it perfectly. Yeah, it's only 51 years ago. It's not much.
Your father also comes up often in discussions, and we have these discussions quite frequently, I'd say, about the relative truthfulness of fiction and nonfiction. And the Yellow Trolley essay is very much about that subject. Bill and Gabo fall into somewhat opposing camps. I don't want to get myself in trouble here by flattening the subtlety of the arguments, but as I understand it, Bill continues to believe that nonfiction and fiction are very different animals, while your father felt that they were somewhat more akin, fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, I mean, he liked to say, on a more practical sense, that the skills he had learned as a journalist were very useful to him in writing fiction. And he liked to say that everything he wrote he had seen or lived or heard or imagined. So he liked to keep that fluid. But I mean, I would argue, without explaining Bill to himself, that all writing is a kind of memory anyway, even if you're making up story, but ultimately, who cares? A good story well told, my dad used to say, and they can put this on my tombstone if they want, there is nothing better than something well written. And he didn't say fiction, nonfiction, just something well written, a story well told. One of his favorite books was The Ides of March, which is an epistolary novel written by Thornton Wilder about Julius Caesar and people in his political and personal surroundings, writing to each other in the weeks leading up to his assassination. And it's a novel. I mean, I'm sure it's well researched, but the letters, of course, are fiction, strictly speaking. They're not based on any letters. I've read the book before. I've been hearing it now on audiobook, and I just let it wash over me. It's like, I swim in it. And of course it's fiction, but I imagine that I'm listening to Caesar, and it's just wonderful to be in it. So I don't think it, let's say that it's not an issue that divided Gabo and Bill.
Right.
No, yeah.
I recall in an interview you talked about the Book of Genesis versus the Big Bang as a theory of physics, and said that regardless of the truthfulness of either, they're both accessible to us only as stories, right? We can only assimilate them as stories.
Well, you can only, even science, how can you assimilate that there was nothing but an infinitely dense something that then blew up and created the universe? If you have to use your child's brain that listens to a bedtime story to even accept that in any possible way. So yeah, there are, we developed from other animals, and there's so many things that you can only digest through the part of your brain that digests story, myth, etc.
So I promised that I wouldn't repeat questions, and in the afternoon we talked about Rodrigo's life as a young person and a young filmmaker, defining himself, that sort of thing. Inevitably, we will get into those kinds of questions because everyone will be interested in them. But at this point, I would like to turn this over to you, and you are free to ask anything you like. We've got a microphone coming.
That's intimidating.
So one over here.
Welcome to Albany.
No, person behind you, yeah.
Okay, I have a question about the movie. And what I'm interested in knowing, in the one scene where the woman walks into the house, she sees this young woman, and they make a call and they have someone come to visit her. Now, was she a prisoner in the prison, and did the guard knock her up, and was that their child?
No, those are sisters.
They are
Those are sisters, and the woman that comes to the house, was abused by that man. That's their father.
And the idea she went there was to kill him, correct? But she couldn't do it.
That's right. A cheerful story.
Rodrigo, it's very difficult to live down your father, but you have achieved, you've carved out a career for yourself, and I'd like to know what the hardships of doing that were, and what you had to overcome in yourself and in the rest of the world in order to assert yourself as an individual artist of the film and whatever else you care. You write very well in this new book of yours, and I don't know. I can't imagine that it's going to be your last book, even though you said it was.
It's. I've thought a lot about this, of course, and on the one hand, when we were kids, my father's fame around the time that you, for example, came to Barcelona, we knew he was well known and respected as a writer, but it wasn't traffic stopping fame. That kept going as we grew up, and then by the time I was out of college and he won the Nobel Prize, then it bloomed. And 15 years ago, when my daughters were little, they walked in with my father. They were leaving a restaurant with my father in Mexico City, and the entire restaurant applauded. I luckily missed that, meaning growing up, I didn't have that. It came in increments. Certainly by the time you're in your 20s and you have this colossal fame and recognition that was fairly universal. I'd be hard-pressed to find that many negative reviews, or it was rare for someone to have that, popularity with readers, commercial popularity, academic popularity, highbrow writers, etc. So in some sense, yes, I guess there's a shadow, to use the classic metaphor, that you're trying to step out of. But I also had a very good father. Do you know what I mean? So I do think that, yes, I could say, well, that part of it was difficult. Yes, but I had a father who worked in the house, was very much into our lives. He was in a daily presence. He was very invested in us. So who has the harder life? The one person who has the not famous father who is neglectful or even abusive. So, I've tried to keep it, not that it's been easy, but I've tried to keep it all in perspective. What I did know was that I was very determined to not be someone who only had that in his life. You know, I didn't want to be just the son of, or what we call in Mexico a junior. Junior is the son that doesn't achieve anything but lives off of his dad's money and has the fancy car and, you know, the ne'er-do-well. So I was, even before I knew what I wanted to do, I was very determined to crash through whatever the obstacle was. In this case, the obstacle was my father's great fame and fortune and talent, but I wouldn't change it for anything. You know, that's what I had, that's who I am, and it came with a lot of great stuff. I mean, a very privileged in the great sense of the word. You know, we grew up surrounded by writers and painters and artists and you know, screenwriters, directors, and we met all kinds of people, you know, who would come by the house, and heads of state and insurgent guerrilla leaders and you know, actors and everything. Just crazy stories. There was a time in Mexico where there was a famously, you know, he was the head of the oil union, the oil workers union, and terribly corrupt for decades. And he, you know, he once called my dad and said, you know, I'll write you a blank check if you'll write my biography. So like, you know, the kind of stuff that you just couldn't make up. So that was the world we grew up in, my brother and I. There was also another time I was remembering, we were having lunch, regular day. Doorbell rings, and the housekeeper goes and brings my dad a business card of the person visiting. And the card reads, Gabriel García Márquez. And my dad says, well, you better let this guy in. And in comes this poor guy with my dad's name and 2 boxes of mail that he's been receiving, for years. So, you know, it was, I mean, to answer your question, yes, and sometimes it's been a wall that you have to work through, your feelings about it, but it also opened so many doors for me, not as far as, you know, having an influence where someone does you a favor, but just the world I grew up in was very privileged. I went to the best schools and I traveled, and, you know, just by virtue of living in that world and having a father who was invested in us. In fact, my dad was very preoccupied that his fame would crush us. That always bothered him. Not a thing he could do about it, but knowing that it worried him was good for us. I hope there's some answers in there somewhere.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Don't give that guy the microphone. Do not.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Ellen, and I was with you this afternoon, and I thought about this question, and I was very happy to see so many young people, but I thought this question was better for the older folks than for all the young people that were there. My son is an artist. I'll brag a little bit. He finished an MFA this summer, and I didn't know she would be here, but his aunt-in-law is here. So his bride's family is here. He got married in July. So I'm very happy about that. I'm sorry to be so long-winded. Here is my question. For me, this sort of worked in reverse. My son is an artist and a filmmaker, and I think a writer. And he'll be happy to hear your story about being in your 30s. I can't wait to tell him because he thinks he waited too long. But anyway, my question is, since you said your interest is in relationships, and he is at the beginning still of his life journey, and I am towards the end of mine. So for us, this kind of worked in reverse. Art came to me through him. he was the artist rather than mostly the way it usually happens. But my question is for you and for me, sometimes I think, because he doesn't really want to listen to me when I say, oh, you should read this book, or you should read this movie, or I can't do that, and I have tried to be more careful in how I make suggestions, but I'm wondering if you've thought about, you mentioned you have daughters. Sometimes I think about, should I write for him something so that when I'm gone, instead of nagging him now, because there are things that I know my parents had wisdom about that I didn't want to listen to when I was young. So my question for you is, have you thought about what you will write for them or not?
I mean, I think anything you write, for your kids is, even if it's not life lessons, even if it's just, anything you remember from your childhood or from growing up, or, I can't imagine that's not going to be enjoyable and interesting and instructive in some way. I've thought about it, but I've tried to, I heard so much before my daughters were born that your kid's childhood, it just flies by, it's gone in a minute, that I really try to focus on paying attention when they were growing up. I think as they've gotten older, I've gotten worse at opening up to them. I try to, but I want to more. I think writing, of course, is great, but I think anything you can communicate face-to-face has enormous value. But if you have the will to write even 30 pages about your childhood or anything that you've never told them about, I'm sure that's going to be a very useful, enjoyable, valuable document. You referred to us as older people. I just worked with an actress who said, we're not older, we have a lot of accumulated life, which I thought was a good way to put it.
So I had a chance to see your film the other night. My husband and I went to see 9 Lives that was shown the other night, and loved it. And it was so amazing to see it in person, because in between each vignette, the audience had such a strong reaction to whatever had just happened in the story. And it was just delightful to be in the middle of that group reaction to each of those little sections. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the inspiration of the movie and the vignettes and sort of how you came to that style. I happen to be someone who loves collections of short stories, and not everybody does, so I liked that you did it like little short stories.
Short stories are a great influence for me, as much as movies and movie directors. I like what a short story does, where it takes an episode, sometimes even a day, sometimes even a moment in a person's life, and that moment or that choice or that whatever happens represents so much of the DNA of a bigger life, where things aren't always said, but so many things are implied. And there's a way that a great short story sits with you after you've read it that you can't even quite explain the way it sits with you. I think, a big novel, of course, when it ends, it possesses you, but a short story feels like you just took a drug of some sort. So that was the intention. My intention was to do this series of vignettes where we spend 12, 13, 14 minutes in the life of a woman's life, and they're all shot in a continuous take, so they're not cut up, so that it's the actual 12 minutes in continuous time. And that was the challenge, to really it's like looking into your neighbor's window and seeing a whole world, and then they're going to see you, so you leave, and you don't know what happened afterwards. You just see, but hopefully there's enough life there that you can see I mean, it's a question of synthesis that even big novels have. You know, a big novel can't describe the entire life of 8 characters. You know, there's always the choosing of the framing, and I love that in short stories. So that was a kind of marriage of film and short story. But I'm very pleased to hear you say that you could feel that vacuum when they ended. And as I remember, they ended very violently. It was always like a hard cut to leave people, you know, hopefully wanting more or hating me more.
Thank you. Buenas noches. Mucho gusto. My question is about, so I saw a film many years ago, a film based on the book, Love in the Time of Cholera. And I personally thought that it did not at all reflect the book. So my question for you as a filmmaker is, and I don't mean for you to criticize the other filmmakers, but...
Well, I'm happy to.
It's more like about Gabriel García Márquez. I feel like his work can never and could never be encapsulated in a movie, but I'm curious to see what you think, because I'm just curious to see what you think.
Well, I mean, it mostly hasn't been, but I think there's been reasons for that. I think, you know, I think look, anytime you adapt a book, you really have to adapt it. There has to be changes, but there are, you know, great adaptations. I mean, you know, the adaptation of Bill's Ironweed, which he did himself, you know, I like the movie a lot. I don't know, you know, as a writer what his feelings about it are, but I thought that worked very well. Yeah, there's the problem of the magical realism, and I mean, it's tough. But I think one of the main stumbling blocks so far is that there's been too much respect for the author. Everyone's been in awe of the author. You know, people have adapted it with such reverence that they haven't freed themselves from the book. And also, for example, in the case of dialogue, Gabo has very little dialogue, and his dialogue is always poetic, always heightened. It's like something that should be on a tombstone. And it's very hard to have actors come in, you know, and instead of, you know, how are you, have some, you know, to be or not to be. It's very tough. So, you know, they're doing now the adaptation of 100 Years of Solitude. Risky, of course. You know, I'm sure half the world will like it and half the world will think it's not the book. But what it has going for it is, first of all, it's in Spanish and it's shot in Colombia. You know, I think a big mistake with Love in the Time of Cholera was making it in English. Also, they're doing it in as many hours as they need. I think it's going to be 16, 18, 20 hours. And it's going to shoot in Colombia. And yeah, I mean, that doesn't guarantee that it's going to work necessarily. But Jose Rivera, whom you spoke about, has done a very good job adapting it. I read the first handful of scripts. And he has adapted it. I mean, even, you know, it starts differently from the book, which was already a bold choice. You know, the book has that very, you know, famous scene of the man remembering something from when he's standing in front of a firing squad. I mean, that's a very, you know, definite beginning. And he changed the beginning to something that makes so much sense with the book. So hopefully, I encourage them to do that. I said, look, you have to adapt. You cannot, you know, you're going to have 16, 18 hours. The characters are going to have to come in and talk. They cannot talk like they're in the Greek theater. You know, these are Colombian people coming through doors to have breakfast. So it's hard. I mean, all books are hard to adapt, but I think too much respect has been a big problem. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned the making the movie in Spanish versus making it in English, because what I've been thinking on my question is, I came to your father's work through an English translation. That was not the language he he wrote in. So I'm curious, A, what you think of the whole translation and what it adds or takes away from a novel, and B, you, from your background, you seem to be a citizen of the world, very international and influences, and how do you use language? Like, what do you determine what language to write in or what language to film in? So my question is really just about language.
I mean, translation is, of course, a thing, and it's a whole discussion. And in some literary circles, people fight over what is the good, what is the better. Just this week I saw a new translation of the Odyssey coming out, and there's been some historical ones. I always thought the translation of 100 Years of Solitude was very good. My father liked it very much. He used to say he preferred himself in English, but I think that's part of the fact that he was not fluent in English and dreamed of being fluent in English. But I mean, it's not ideal, but I myself have read, all the French and Russian books I've read in Spanish or in English. So, I mean, enough comes through that they're amazing. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's how we read, it's how we live, it's how we understand. So I don't think, I mean, poetry, tougher. I've sometimes have read, bilingual editions of poetry that are Spanish, English, and when you see how much poems can change in translation, then you do wonder, how are we appreciating it? That's a bigger leap. But I think a good translation of prose is possible, and if not, it's inevitable. So As for myself, I mean, I write in English if I think it's a movie that's going to happen in the US. I write in Spanish if I want to make it in Latin America. It's really just, this book I wrote in English because I wrote it very quickly after my father died, and I just wanted to get it all down. And if I write in Spanish, I get much more caught up in style and is this good, and that I can get caught up in what Bill was saying. Am I trapped in my father's world? Yes, I mean, in Spanish I'm more careful writing in Spanish. I want Spanish, whereas English I can just pardon the expression, just vomit the book. I just needed to get it out of my system. So I wrote it in English. When it was going to be published, I said, okay, I'm going to write it in Spanish now, because it's going to come out in Spanish. And I translated about 10 pages and realized I could not put myself through it again emotionally. I did not want to. Because if you're the writer yourself, your translation is a revision. It's not just the translation. You're finding new ways of saying things that sound like you. So after a while, I couldn't, and this woman from Colombia who lives in Spain did a very good translation, but then when it came to me, it didn't sound like me. So I still had to get into it. But yeah, that's the only time where I've thought, okay, I'm going to write this in English because it's just a bunch of notes that I have to get down. And my real craft is as a screenwriter, so I didn't want to be bogged down with, fighting elements of style in Spanish.
So we'll take a couple more questions, and if you don't get to ask a question that you urgently want to ask, you'll have an opportunity to do that at the signing table. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, how did film come to you? Were there building blocks to it that you wanted to be a screenwriter and make films?
No, I did a lot of still photography when I was growing up, when I was in middle school and high school and into college also. I had a vague idea that I wanted to be a still photographer. I mean, I loved it, but I thought that could be a possibility. But then, in college and after, I started getting more and more interested in film, so I started exploring being a cameraman for film. And I did do that. I was in the camera department of movies and TV and commercials for a long time, and it wasn't until my mid-30s that, by virtue of watching directors interact with actors and what actors were doing, and I just started getting more interested in the story, and so I sort of challenged myself to write a script. which I did eventually after much trial and error. But I took the long way around to becoming a storyteller and a writer. I mean, just the idea that I was writing something seemed incredibly daunting to me. We were saying earlier today, finally I became a writer. I became a screenwriter, which for me was like, wow, that happened. And everyone around me just looked at me and said, duh. This was always going to happen to you because of where you grew up and how you grew up and who you grew up with. So it was mostly through still photography and then being a cameraman. And I guess kind of, beating around the bush, pussyfooting around the fact that I just wanted to tell a story and didn't know it.
Where did you learn your English?
We always went to English schools, my brother and I, because one of my father's frustrations was that he was not fluent in English. He was fluent in French and fairly fluent in Italian, but his English was choppy at best, which, you knew from hanging out with him. He would occasionally venture a sentence or two, but he didn't want to really get into it. So I think he lived that part of his life vicariously through us. So we always went to schools in English, and we were bilingual. We were probably your interpreter when you came over to our house. That's who we were forever. I interpreted, my brother and I took turns interpreting when my father did his Paris Review interview. And of course, he's talking Spanish because he said his English is not good enough. But if you miss something just slightly, he'd say, "That's not what I said. I meant this." So yeah, always.
My wife was a translator. She spoke.
Oh, of course she did. Of course, Dana spoke Spanish. Of course, yes, that's right.
We were speaking Spanglish
Spanglish the whole time. I forgot about that. Yeah.
all the way through.
Yeah.
I was speaking Spanish. Gabo.
Well, I'm sure after a few drinks, like you guys used to, yeah, after a couple of whiskeys, everyone was bilingual. Yeah.
So one more question, and if somebody feels that they will die if they don't ask a question, we'll take another question after that. Yeah.
Not to comment at all on Gabo's prodigious creativity, but I was just wondering if there's anything of your own family history in the story of the Buendias.
Yeah, there's always, I was saying that I was reading a chapter of 100 Years of Solitude last week, and there was a story of the first two sons, which is the first Aureliano and the first Jose Arcadio. And Jose Arcadio was like 14, and he'd been a very cheerful child, and then all of a sudden he'd become a little closed off and a little serious, and he'd spend a lot of time in his room, and he was mysterious. And it turned out that he was having an affair with the housekeeper, who was a full-grown woman, and she was pregnant. And that happened to my father with one of his brothers. His mother said to my father, can you take your brother out? He's been a little reclusive. He's a little strange. He feels a little depressed. I think she was a little scared that he might be gay. And so my father took him out. My father was older and discovered that he had made the maid pregnant. So that's just me peeking into one chapter of 100 Years of Solitude last week by chance. So it's not all literally from. But he said that everything he had seen, lived, thought, imagined, heard, he put in his books in some form or another, directly or ciphered, or. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there, and I'm sure there's other stuff that only the person who's being referred to recognizes. Yeah.
You shared a wonderful story at dinner. I wonder if you could share for the audience the editor who came to visit your mother at her house about a week after your father died.
Yeah, there was a week after my father died, my mom had received a lot of people who came in to give condolences, acquaintances, friends we hadn't seen forever, friends and family who flew in, even ex-presidents, a whole bunch of people. And then at lunch, she got a card that said, so-and-so Porrua. And the Porruas are a well-known family in Mexico who publishes huge collections of classics. So she said, well, I don't know him, but he probably knew your dad. So she sat in the living room, he came in, she didn't recognize him, they talked, and he talked a lot about having spent time with my dad, and he asked about me and my brother. He asked about Monica, who's my dad's assistant. Then Monica came in and he hugged her profusely. She did not recognize him. And that went on for about an hour and a half, and eventually he said, I'm sorry, it's taken me a week to come here. I live in Cuernavaca, which is an hour's drive away. I didn't have a car, so I borrowed my friend's car. Now that car is broken down. I can't get back to Cuernavaca. Would you mind lending me $200? So my mom lent him $200, and of course, the guy left, and then I told the story to someone the next day, and the person said to me, yeah, that guy's going around, and it's a con. And my mother laughed like crazy. She thought it was hysterical. This is the stuff that happened in the house. Yeah.
So again, books are for sale. We'll have a signing line. You can get your book signed. You can ask questions. Nobody's got the microphone right now, right? Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. So please, thunderous applause for Rodrigo Garcia.
Clapping at the audience was something I learned in Cuba. It was a very communist custom. The audience clapped, and the artist would clap back.